of that and try to get through as many of those questions as possible after Norm and Rachel give their presentations. I'm going to be moderating tonight. My name is Rachel Swanteson-Franz. I work for the Wilderness Society on policy issues related to equitable access to the outdoors, but I'm also privileged to be an at-large board member with the Water Advocates. For those who are joining and not familiar with the Middle Rio Grande Water Advocates, our mission is to advocate for a balanced, equitable, and resilient water future for the Middle Rio Grande, which stretches from Ottawee Bridge to Elephant Butte Dam, as well as statewide through public education and engagement, much like the workshops we're doing now, multi-stakeholder dialogue and planning, as well as civic participation. We are doing this workshop and speaker series as part of our role in educating and convening spaces for this dialogue about pressing water issues. And we'll be hosting these trainings on the third Thursday of every month at 6:30, same time as this one. So you can find more info on those on our website. And we would be remiss to not thank the support from our co-sponsors, which are 350 New Mexico and Interfaith Power and Light, who are really supporting making this series happen. If you're joining and you haven't already, welcome, welcome. Thanks so much for spending your evening with us, and please keep introducing yourself in the chat. I know for security reasons, we have everyone muted, but feel free to use the chat and reactions to engage with us in this virtual space. For tonight's session, the focus is on legislation that passed in the 2023 legislature just earlier this year that resulted in a new regional water resilience planning law. We are all, with the guidance of Norm and Rachel, going to learn about the who, where, why, and what of this law and how we can and should be engaged through this process. This workshop, if you're here for this one, you got to sign up for the July one, because this really sets up the stage for the July conversation with the Interstate Stream Commission. Guiding the conversation today are Norm Gaum and Rachel Kahn. Norm Gaum is the president of the Rio Grande of the Water Advocates, a task force member and now a water ambassador. He is the co-lead currently for the Task Force Water Management and Planning Work Group. And his advocacy interests really focus on creating a balanced and sustainable and resilient water future for New Mexico statewide and along the Rio Grande. Rachel Kahn is the deputy director for the conservation organization Amigos Bravos, was the technical advisor on the Task Force River, Aquifer, and Watershed Health Working Group, and is also a board member for the Water Advocates. Rachel's advocacy interests are around protecting and restoring New Mexico's watersheds. So for tonight, I'm really going to pass it off to Norm and Rachel. They're going to give presentations and really give us the background that we need. Then we're going to move into moderated breakout sessions, small breakout sessions to discuss the topic at hand. How are we going to increase public engagement and really figure out what are our next steps? And we'll share out with the entire group after that, and then close. And I'll make sure after Rachel and Norm's presentations that we have a short Q&A session. So once again, keep introducing yourself in the chat if you haven't already. Use your reactions, get excited, cheer them on, and ask your questions in the chat, because we're going to be monitoring that. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to, I believe, Norm, who's going to kick us off. And Norm, you're going to want to unmute, I think. There you go.
Thank you so much. Welcome everybody to this workshop. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope that you will join us for workshops down the line. I'm trying to share my screen. And I'm having an issue, so please bear with me for just a second. Let me try again. I don't see that I'm sharing my screen. I am I am really sorry about this. I have a new computer and I didn't anticipate this difficulty.
Norm, if you want to drop those in an email to me, I can share for you, if that would be easier.
Well, I'm just a moment. I'm trying to figure out what I need to do here.
In the meantime, everyone, we will have a survey that will pop up at the very end of this presentation, and we would be extremely grateful if you would take the time to do that survey for us. It really helps us with planning our next series sets and getting information about who is part of this program and who we should reach out to get more people involved. And so that survey is really helpful for us. If you could take that survey when it pops up automatically when you close out of this Zoom session later tonight, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
All right, I'm very sorry, but I think I'm going to have to switch computers because I can't work this out. And
Do you
Rachel,
want me to go first?
Rachel, yes, I know that's the plan, but I would like you to go first while I get this straightened out. Thank you.
Great. I will. All right. Oh. Now I'm having some problems there. Sorry about that. Were you all able to see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, there we go. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Rachel Kahn. I'm the Deputy Director of Amigos Bravos. This evening, we're going to be talking about the regional water plan bill that was passed, SB 337, in the last legislative session. I thought I would start first with why regional water planning matters. Why should we care about this? Why should we engage in another planning effort around water? And I think there's many reasons. One of the big reasons for me is right here in the slide, which is my kids. Two of these are my kids in the upper, right on the banks of the upper Rio Grande. And that's the biggest reason personally for me for doing this work and for caring about regional water planning is future generations. Because the health, well-being, and future of people and nature depends on a secure, sustainable supply of water. And we need to do the hard work of talking to each other, working together to identify a path forward. I think that regional water planning is important because it ensures that communities' values are recognized in planning, that it's not a top-down approach just from Santa Fe, that the regions are really working together to identify priorities in those areas of the state. And in addition, it provides for the ability for regional custom-made solutions to water challenges that may not be as pressing in other regions or on a statewide level. And really, we need to do this work so that we can understand the challenges ahead and identify creative and workable solutions, that there's some consensus and coming together to do that work. So SB 337, and during the last bit of the legislative session, there were some last minute changes to the bill, which here at Amigos Bravos we were disappointed in. I thought I'd just touch on them briefly just to give a sense of some of the things that we hope will be included going forward, even though they aren't in the language of the bill itself. So all references to equity were removed, to the word equity were removed from the bill. Language at-risk communities was swapped for rural communities. There was the requirement to consider environmental, non-economic values and the needs of future generations of New Mexicans. That was also removed from the bill. But because these things were removed from the bill, there was unanimous support in passing the bill, which I think is important for our state to have broad support and coming together to support regional water planning going forward. So some of the highlights, some of the good things that are included in the bill is that there's in a number of places language about best science and data and models being utilized to create these plans. And this is an actual quote right here from the bill language, talking about best science and scientific integrity, and transparency and professionalism, all good things. And it's good that language is in the bill. The bill also lays out implementation and reporting requirements, requires the consideration of public welfare and future generations. There's also language in there about providing opportunities for grants and loans, and it sets out how grants and loans will be approved and considered. And it sets up a comprehensive rulemaking and guidance guideline process, which is, from my perspective, a really critical part of the bill, because it really sets up numerous requirements that for each of those processes. And I see that as an opportunity for the public to really engage and make sure that we are setting ourselves up as a state to build strong plans, to develop and come together around strong planning documents in our regions. And so my goal, the reason why I wanted to be part of this here tonight is to encourage everyone to participate in these processes, both in the rulemaking and the guidelines, and then in the planning, in the development of the regional plans themselves. Because without a lot of public participation and engagement, this process is not going to work. And the way that we can get to strong plans is that we do the upfront work in the rulemaking and guideline process, to put strong guardrails and requirements into the process to make sure that we can get where we want to go. As I said, those last minute changes were disappointing, but I do think that we can make up for that in the rulemaking and guideline processes. If those are robust and inclusive, I think that we can get a lot of the components that we were hoping to see in the bill. We hope we can see those in those processes. So hopefully next month on the July 20th Advocates Forum, we'll get some more details about those processes when the ISC will be presenting. To go through some of the components that are included in the bill for the rulemaking process. So the bill lays out that the ISC will establish rules that or will develop rules that will establish the regions and the boundaries, et cetera, of that will be regional planning entities. And the rules will establish what are the components of a regional water plan, what a regional water plan must include to be accepted. It will lay out how regions can communicate with the ISC. It will lay out the composition of the regional water planning entities, and it will also lay out how regions will consider public welfare values and the needs of future generations. So these are all critical things that will be laid out in the rulemaking process. So it's important for the public to engage in that rulemaking process to make sure that these things are well represented in the final rule. The guideline process is, and I wanted to add that in the rulemaking process, and state rulemaking processes, there's more provisions for public involvement. Though the ISC doesn't have as many regulations that lay out exactly how those will be, unlike some of the other boards and commissions we have in our state, which have specific regulations that really lay out strong public participation processes, that we expect that this rulemaking process will have, because most rulemaking processes do have a strong public input component. It is a little less clear about the guideline process, how much public input will be incorporated into the development of these guidelines. And so it's important for all of us to track this process and advocate for strong public involvement in the development of these guidelines. The legislation itself lays out that the guidelines will include, will establish regional stakeholders and opportunities for collaboration. They will establish public input requirements for regional water planning, requirements for proposals for grants or loans, approval process for how those grants and loans will be approved, so a process for that. It will lay out how agencies will collaborate on these regional water plans. There will be metrics for reporting will be developed in these guidelines. Procedures to support implementation of the plans will be included in the guidelines. And I think that's critical, because we want these plans to be representative of the stakeholders and be collaborative and a lot of consensus around them. And we also want them to include very clear-cut implementation steps so that we can get to our goal. And these guidelines will also include schedule of implementation, including integration with the statewide planning objectives. I thought that I would touch a little bit on Amigos Bravos's priorities that we would like to see in these, in the rulemaking and in the guidelines. So one of the big things that we were disappointed about in the final bill language is that the word equity was removed. We had been advocating for there to be a definition included in the bill of equity, but that was not incorporated. It's critically important that inclusivity and centering equity is high and centered in any planning process. We want to see broad stakeholder representation. We want to see laying out specific measures that will ensure equitable participation in the planning process, including potentially the allocation of resources to ensure diverse voices are able to participate in the planning process. So we want to see some actual specific measures included in the rules or the guideline, in the rule or the guideline. A lot of folks wouldn't be able to participate, don't have the resources to participate in the planning process unless, for example, stipends are provided, childcare. And so we really want to see specific outreach requirements included in the rule and the guidelines. We'd again like to see, as I mentioned, we had proposed and advocated for a definition of equity to be included in the bill language. We would like to see that in either the rule or the guidelines. The proposed definition that we had put forth is equity means a focus on fairness and justice and a recognition that individuals and communities do not always start from the same place and resources, but may need to be deployed. That communities, recognition that individuals and communities do not always start from the same place, and resources may need to be deployed to ensure broad and diverse inclusivity so all New Mexicans' needs for safe and accessible water resources are met. And another important part of including of having strong equity inclusion components in the rule and the guidelines is really focusing on the decision-making power, how decisions are going to be made within these regional water planning entities, so that consensus building is really focused on and prioritized. The other priority that we have is river and watershed health and natural systems. We, as I mentioned, the language, there was language that was removed from the bill that elevated natural systems and watershed health. And so we hope to see in the rule and the guidelines the recognition of the importance of ecological health and ecosystem services and watershed resilience, and to ensure that those perspectives are included in the regional planning process. And also that those voices for those values are included in the makeup of the regional water planning body and the water planning entities. Because prioritizing balance to protect habitat and natural riverine and riparian system water uses is critically important. So we hope to see that in the final rule and guidelines, a prioritization of that in the final rule and guidelines. The tribal and Pueblo participation. So I think that there's a good start for that in the legislation itself, but it will be key to follow through on all of that language of all of the goals stated in the legislation, to make sure that there is true and meaningful engagement and dialogue with tribes and pueblos, to ensure the final plans respect and incorporate the priorities of tribes and pueblos. So that will be a key going forward. Amigos Bravos is also, and I want to mention actually that we came up with these priorities with some of our other NGO partners in the state. So it was a collaborative effort in developing these priorities and communicating to the ISC and to the legislature on these priorities for the bill. So we want the next one is planning for the 21st century. So as many of us on this call know, science is telling us we are in trouble in terms of our water resources. We know that our water supplies will shrink by at least 20% by 2050, and temperatures are set to increase by 5 to 7 degrees across the state. Of course, creating, as we all know, a hotter and drier future, making it all the more important that we are planning for that we are recognizing reality, and that these plans will plans for resilience for our state. And we need to acknowledge the hydrological realities of the 21st century in these plans. Another priority for us is the incorporation of green and natural infrastructure. So green and natural infrastructure, it incorporates both the natural environment and engineered systems in ways that protect and restore our water systems, that they often mimic the natural water cycle, and it can restore or replicate ecosystem function and values. And there's a lot of benefits with using green and natural infrastructure. They can provide services to communities such as water storage, flood management, water quality treatment, flood control, and we hope that there can be some focus and prioritization of green and natural infrastructure solutions identified in the plan, so that we're, as a state, are prioritizing these green and natural infrastructure solutions to our water crisis. And this is really, and examples, I could provide a couple examples of what green and natural infrastructure are. many of you probably know, but it includes things like green roofs, permeable pavement, wetland restoration, aquifers, rain gardens, curb cuts, bioswales, restoring riparian areas and floodplains. So all of these are critically important to create a resilient New Mexico water system. And another reason why we think it's really important for us as a state to prioritize green and natural infrastructure is that federal funding and guidance documents are prioritizing green and natural infrastructure more and more as cost effective, and are prioritizing federal funds towards those types of projects. So we want to make sure that we position New Mexico to be in a place to be able to utilize those federal funds going into the future. And the other thing that Amigos Bravos is prioritizing is implementation. We want to be able to implement these plans and see real progress towards creating a resilient New Mexico water future. So this is kind of the summary of our perspective about supporting water planning throughout the state, so that with the goal of reducing water demand in ways that protect or enhance our environment, economy, and culture. And then there's the question, so what do we do from here? Where do we go from here? I put together a couple of actions to take. As I mentioned, we want to make sure that the ISC incorporates robust public involvement in the rulemaking and guideline processes. That's critically important, I think, to set us up for success going forward, is making sure that there's a lot of involvement, and that the rule and the guideline is strong and incorporates a diverse perspectives across the state. And another action that we all can take is to participate in that rulemaking and guideline process. So we will, from the advocates and Amigos Bravos, be keeping you updated as those processes move forward. Another action to take is to advocate for your regional water planning entity to include diverse perspectives that have equal decision-making power and centers consensus building. So I think that's part of what we're going to be working on later today, is how can we build momentum behind this process to get a lot of public involvement in the regional water planning process going forward. And then a fourth action that I put up here is that we should all be advocating for funding for implementing plans once they're completed. So advocate for the legislature to fund implementation after, well, we need to fund the plan development and then fund the implementation of the plan afterwards. So that's what I had as
the second part, Rachel. Thank you so much for that presentation. I was unable to work out my problems, so Brittany is going to share my screens, and we'll take it. We'll just take it from there.
Can you see that?
I can't. Yes, it's up. Thank you. So next slide. We have a pending tragedy of our water resource commons. And if we continue the status quo, we will bring an irreversible tragedy of the commons to the middle Rio Grande. We have to prevent that. And to do that, we need to take action, and it needs to be sooner rather than later. And just to briefly describe some of the things that are happening, we're short of surface water in most years, and the state has no ability at this point to basically regulate water use under existing permits. What When water supplies are short from the river, then users will switch to groundwater. Pumping will accelerate the declines in the aquifer at the same time that climate change is reducing the groundwater recharge of the aquifer. That pumping will cause increased return flows now, that groundwater pumping that will help the river downstream a little, but most of the depletion of the river will take place in the future. That's the way the groundwater system here works. And so pumping groundwater now puts a debt that the river will pay back to the groundwater system far into the future when there's less water. Again, there are no legal mechanisms or state capacity to prevent this. And every year that passes without a solution forecloses opportunities for us to get the resilient, sustainable water future that I think we all agree we would love to see in this beloved state of ours. Next slide. I'm going to skip this one due to time, but thank you. So this is an overview, and again, this was supposed to be the first presentation. The legislature did act in 2023, and it passed this regional water resilience planning law. And now it's up to the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission and us and all of New Mexicans to implement this water planning program and see that it's a success. Next slide. The water advocates presented a concept paper to the legislative committee called the Water and Natural Resources Committee at its meeting at Sandia Pueblo in July of 2022. We presented at that time 4 bills that we wanted to see. One was to assure the Middle Rio Grande compact compliance. And we phrased that as to provide the Lower Rio Grande with their share of the water that right now we're using some of. The second priority was to basically organize state government and to create a New Mexico Water Resources Department. A third was to modernize the regional water planning statute, and that was done. So that's the one of the 4 that got through. And then our fourth priority was to set aside windfall revenue. We have record windfall revenues into a $1 billion fund that would pay for implementation of infrastructure and policies and projects to help make us sustainable in the future. So we have one, and there are many, many actually to go. Next slide. The regional water planning law was recommended by the New Mexico Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force in its work last year. Elevate Regional Water Planning is the name of one of the 17 recommendations, and Strategy A of that recommendation, and there are 8 strategies as I recall, is to change the statute and modernize it. And that's what has been done. Overall, the task force made 17 recommendations and recommended over 100 strategies to implement them. We have a great big job to do. Next slide. I wanted to just tell you a little story behind this new bipartisan law that was passed. Amending the old 1987 regional water planning statute or replacing it has been a priority of the Middle Rio Grande advocates since 2018. We've been working toward that. And we proposed changes in 2019, which didn't make it very far at all. The third bullet, let's see, I've covered the next 2. The Middle Rio Grande Water Advocates Executive Council drafted the bill after the recommendations made by the task force, and we sought out review and comment from task force members. Rachel asked me to send her and the environmental, well, some of her allies and colleagues, the bill, which I did. They made great recommendations because the draft bill that the water advocates prepared were more focused on water quantity management. They brought in the economic and environmental, non-economic and environmental values, which were incorporated in the draft bill. The draft bill that we provided was, we reviewed it with the sponsor and the Senate Majority Leader Peter Wirth and the sponsor, Senator Liz Stefanik. The sponsor concluded that this bill wouldn't make it through unless it were a state agency bill, which requires the governor's consent. The state engineer, Mike Hammond, was all for that. He got the governor's consent and it became a state agency bill. In the process, the state engineer greatly pared the bill down from the draft and made it less prescriptive. And in the end, the bill that passed is less prescriptive, but it delegates basically a tremendous amount of responsibility and authority to the Interstate Stream Commission to flesh out the planning program and to set the criteria for it in a way that's commensurate with the law that was passed. The bill made it through the Senate with changes to accommodate some Pueblo comments that were received late. The bill was basically, there was a committee substitute to incorporate those amendments. It passed 2 Senate committees without a no vote, and it passed the House floor unanimously. When it went to the House, it passed a House committee unanimously, but Republican House members were concerned and proposed some amendments which were worked out with the state engineer. We weren't a part of that, and the amended bill passed without a single vote against it. It was signed by the governor, and celebration today, it became, the new law became effective today. Next slide. So what does this new law do? Rachel covered some of this, but in my mind, it does 5 major things. It authorizes this new statewide water resilience planning program. It sets it provides statutory direction and establishes criteria that the program must follow. It delegates authority and responsibility to the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, which is New Mexico's water planning agency, to flesh out the planning program with rules and guidelines and to implement it. It authorizes the ISC to define water resilience planning regions, to administer the state funding, including making grants and loans to regional water planning entities. And very importantly, in the past, the Interstate Stream Commission has really not reviewed plans, but they've accepted them literally for filing. In this case, the plans are intended to be implemented, and the law provides that the Interstate Stream Commission must review them, work out differences with the regional water planning entity, and then approve them. And approve them means that they'll be recommended for implementation. And finally, the law authorizes regional water planning entities state funding of their work, and it gives them some direction as to how they, some statutory direction as to how they're to do their job. Next slide. So I'm going to quickly go over, and some of this is a little repetitious to Rachel's presentation, but I think that you need to hear it again, perhaps, and maybe in this format. So The ISC has to promulgate rules that do several things. At a minimum, they can do, the ISC rules can address more, but at a minimum, they have to establish the number and boundaries of water planning regions. They have to set forth the criteria for the Interstate Stream Commission's approval of completed plans, and completed plans are defined there that they have to have prioritized, and prioritized is a key concept, projects, programs, and policies that the region recommends be enacted to help them balance their water demand with their water supply. The ISC rules have to establish the procedures that regional water planning entities will use to define the public welfare of the region and the needs of future generations of New Mexico in that region. Rachel mentioned that the legislature, and it was in these House amendments, stripped the words equity. They also stripped the words environmental, non-economic values from the law, and they substituted public welfare of the region for those concepts. So the regions are to determine the regional water public welfare, and they may consider that in their plan. And the rules have to establish they have to establish the basic criteria for the composition of regional water planning entities. So the rules are formally set forth. Once they're in place, they're hard to change, and they have the force of law. The legislation also directs the state engineer to adopt guidelines. And those guidelines must, at a minimum, do a great number of things that I'm going to quickly go over with you. Guidelines are more informal. They're the ISC's guidelines. The ISC can change them as the needs of the planning program reveal themselves with time. So the guidelines have to tell the regions how they will identify stakeholders and how they will provide the opportunities for collaboration. The guidelines have to establish minimum public input requirements. The guidelines will govern the proposals from regions for state funding of water planning and approvals. I'm sorry, the guidelines will tell how the state funding and approvals will come forward. They set the process for collaboration between state agencies on these plans. They establish metrics for reporting progress and outcomes of the program. They have to put forward a schedule for the statewide regional water planning program and how it will integrate with state objectives. Next slide. And I'm going to read this one to you because it's incredibly important. They have to adopt guidelines that at a minimum, and Rachel said this too, the guidelines must ensure by using the integrated water data and information platform that's being developed under the 2019 Water Data Act, that the best science data and models related to water resource planning in the region are available to the regional water planning entities. And this is very important, and it's something we fought for. And that information has to be used with scientific integrity, which means the adherence to principles of honesty, objectivity, transparency, and professionalism in developing, vetting, and prioritizing the proposals of the regions. So one of the criticisms of the past water planning program is it wasn't really that science-based, and it was not in many regions conducted with scientific integrity. That will change going forward. And so that's what the guidelines provide. And then the ISC has some additional requirements. They must emphasize engagement, communication, and education in these regional water planning activities statewide. The ISC shall provide engagement with Indian tribes and pueblos, and they must set up a consultation process specific for this program with Indian nations, tribes, and pueblos. They are the Interstate Stream Commission is to provide engagement with acequia communities, and they are to provide for the engagement of rural communities, those that may not have the resources to come to the table in an equal footing. The ISC has to report annually in detail to the legislature. And finally, the Interstate Stream Commission has to support regional water planning entities. They have to help the entities develop their technical and local capacity to do this planning. They have to provide the regional water planning entities with the statewide objectives, and the Act actually lists 3 of them: compliance with interstate stream compacts, compliance with the Endangered Species Act, and full consideration and regard for tribal water rights, for Native American water rights that are settled by acts of Congress or are reserved by the United States. They have to support regional water planning entities if they want to engage in, if they want to develop plans for alternative administration, which means not by priority administration within their region. That's a regional option, but if a region wants to do that, the ISC must help them. And finally, the ISC has to help regions identify funding sources and support funding for them. Next slide.
Hey, Norm, I just want to flag the time. We're getting a lot of questions piling up, so we might want to make sure we leave space for that. So maybe if you can cut it down to like a minute wrap up if possible. I think that would be awesome.
I'll do that. So there are also rules that regional water planning entities have to follow that are in the statute. These slides will be available, and due to the time, I'm not going to go over them in detail. Next slide. And this is more of what the regional water planning entities shall do. So next slide. I mentioned the House floor amendments, and I've already covered them some, but I wanted to tell you a little bit more about what they did. They emphasize state law, and they explicitly protect state water rights and the concept of priority administration. Plans shall not go outside state law, nor shall they attempt to override priority administration unless it's through this already authorized program of alternative administration. They substituted public welfare of the region for environmental and non-economic values and equity and other values that I was hoping would come directly from the state. And they gave, I think this is maybe one of the most important things, they gave more autonomy to the regions. So the regions, as I said, get to develop their public welfare, and they are to consider, but aren't required by the statute, to provide crucial aspects like things that help the public welfare of the region and access by everybody in the region to domestic water. And I believe I have one more slide. These were announcements, and I am going to forego those, except the very first one. I wanted to let you know that I have the distinct honor and privilege of being a facilitator for a group of Argentine Fulbright scholars who are meeting this week and for one more week at the University of New Mexico. They are studying 2 cases, and the theme is peace through policymaking. We won't have internal peace in New Mexico unless we make some good water policy. So they are studying this case study. I'm their case study facilitator. They will be making a report. And I would like your assistance to help that report go viral. And I will be in further contact with you. So without further ado, Rachel, I'm going to turn it back to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And everyone can use their reactions and give Norm and Rachel a great virtual round of applause. Thanks so much for walking us through that process. We've got a lot of questions, and I know we definitely want to get into our breakout rooms. So I'm going to try to get through as many as possible, but we might not, and that's okay. We'll figure out a way to get questions answered back to you. I will say a couple of the questions that we saw coming through the chat, Norm and Rachel, were really around participation, as well as what equity is going to look like in this process now that it's out of the bill. So I'm hoping maybe you all can expound a little bit more on what participation will look like, and really looking at how can people get involved, and more importantly, how can we make sure that people who are often not engaged in this process get engaged. What are the opportunities for providing stipends or childcare or some of those other things that Rachel talked about? Yeah, so how do we really make sure the public engagement process is truly equitable and also goes beyond superficial consultation or engagement, and really is a true community process?
Well, I believe that we're going to take you into breakout rooms now. And Rachel, were you going to provide the guidelines for the breakout rooms and what we want to see?
I was going to say, I think we've got probably about 5. Brittany, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're doing a better job of timekeeping. I think we've got some time for questions directly to you all, and maybe you can set the stage and give people some things to think about, and then we can move into the breakouts. But Brittany, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah.
No, that's correct. Yes.
Very
Cool.
good.
So maybe Rachel and Norm, if you want to take an initial stab, or maybe sort of share what people should be thinking about, or what you're thinking about in terms of how do we go deeper and beyond superficial consultation and engagement in this process.
Well, I think that there's opportunities in the rule and the guideline process for there to be specific measures that require regional planning entities to set up protocols and best practices for including equitable participation by all stakeholders. I mentioned some of those and it goes beyond just saying we shall do it. It's setting up clear measures, saying specific. I mentioned providing stipends, for example, childcare, really having different formats of engagement, so that it isn't always, during work hours or during the week. It's also engagement in other forums besides Zoom, or, that there are different ways for people to participate and to provide their perspective and priorities in the process. And it also is it's also having maybe some ambassadors from the planning entities going out to people, not expecting stakeholders in the region to come to a specific meeting, but going to some of the community groups, people who engage on water issues and community issues, agricultural groups in the regions, to go to entities instead of expecting people to make the time to come to a specific water planning meeting. So I think those are some of the measures that could be incorporated and laid out in the guidelines or the rule.
And I wonder,
complement that with
Norm, maybe while you're going, if you can, I think this is an important question that's maybe will help frame it up too. Like, I think people are also wondering when and with whom are we getting involved with these developing rules and guidelines, and maybe that's a teaser for July's session as well.
Yes, the answer to that question specifically is come to our July 20th workshop. and hear from the Interstate Stream Commission, whose job it is to implement this program. Now, they are getting started. The law became effective today. They did get some resources, but no staff to implement this new law. I think they do have some discretion. I don't know exactly what their plans are. Rulemaking takes a long time. It's a very formal procedure. So the earliest the program could begin would be in 2025, which sounds like a long way away. But I expect that the ISC will begin engagement in the rulemaking process right away. I know their intentions are to roll out this program statewide, and right now the rules and the guidelines they're developing will apply statewide. And so they have to hear from all areas of New Mexico. And I think it's up to us to engage with them. They're going to make the opportunities available. I think it would be great if we could, as representatives of some values in this region, get our heads together and make strong recommendations as to what the rules and the guidelines contain. And those opportunities will be there. But in order to make this the strongest program we can, the ISC is going to have to put details that are not in the statute in these rules and guidelines. And those include, unfortunately, everything that Rachel just mentioned might be possible. So I would hope they would be in the rules and guidelines, but it's our job to advocate and do everything we can to make sure that they are.
Wonderful. Thank you, Norm and Rachel. I think we've got 1 minute for one question that I think is another big one. Since the ISC only got a little bit of discretionary funding and they didn't receive staff, what do you all see as the primary sources of funding to carry out these projects and goals as established by this effort?
Well, I think that the state is going to need to fund the Regional Water Resilience Planning Program and fund entities. And I would hope that that would be through grants. It has to be, and the resources are there to do it. The legislature just has to recognize that without water, there's nothing. And that water is a priority, and it's a priority for funding. So this legislative session, even though I've been critical, was actually a huge step forward. And I think it's our job to engage so that when we look back 4 years from now, we will see the passage of this law as a tipping point that snowballs into getting the resources and policies and programs we need to make water use in New Mexico resilient and much more sustainable.
Wonderful.
And I would just like to jump that. Maybe we should just end with that because that was beautiful, Norm.
If you can do it, if you can surpass that and do it in 30 seconds, Rachel, you got it. Go for it.
I don't think I can surpass this, but I'll compliment it a little bit, which is that I see the requirements to have implementable actions as part of these plans. We want to make sure that those are robust enough. The requirements for implementation are robust enough that what we get out of these plans are specific proposals that could go forward in proposals for federal funding or state funding, like the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund. They actually have an intended use plan out right now for comment if anyone's interested, but that's sources of funding for water infrastructure funding. And so hopefully these plans will identify priorities on the regional basis and set up a region for accessing some of those state and federal funding sources.
Wonderful. Thank you. I know there are still some questions left unanswered, but we will figure out a way to try to get those answered and out to folks who asked them. we're going to move into the interactive portion in breakout rooms. So everyone will be split into about 4 or 5 breakout rooms. In there, please volunteer or select someone to be a note taker, because that will be shared out in our report out after our breakouts, which the breakouts will be about 7 minutes. We're cutting it a bit short, but I have faith that you all will be able to hammer out a lot of good stuff in that time. In those breakout rooms, we're really hoping that you all talk about what are the best approaches to encourage public participation. Rachel and Norm gave some great examples, but I know there are so many more that we can come up together, and we want to hear about those so that we can advocate for them. And what are the key ingredients for ultimate success in this process? And don't worry about scribbling them down. They will be written down in the breakout group that you get into, but that's what we're thinking about, is really brainstorming together how to encourage public participation. And I believe Brittany is going to get those breakout rooms up and open. And don't forget a note taker.
And we'll have about 6 minutes, and there'll be a 60-second notice when you're going to be moved back into the main room. So you should be getting a notice right now to go into your breakout room.
Goodness, how did we end up together?
We're actually not in a breakout room. It's still assigning.
Okay.
It's I'll try to move you into something. I don't know why. It's where are you?
So did the don't move me into a room.
Okay.
Did the break, you think they know what to do?
I hope so. Do you want me to pop into each one? I think I can do that. I'm not positive I can, but yeah, I can. I think I can go into each room and just double check.
Okay.
So some of our breakout rooms just got tiny because some people left. Should I move? I don't want to move people around really.
No, I wouldn't move them. Let's just do the best we can.
Do you want to join the one that's really small?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. How do I assign you? Oh, as co-host. Okay. Can you go click the 3 dots more at the bottom? Right? Go breakout rooms, and it'll bring out the breakout rooms in progress. And I want you to join room 1. There's a join button on the top right.
We have about 100. Oops. Norm. And Lynn, you didn't say anything. Norm, are you there?
He's muted.
Hi, Barbara.
Yeah.
Hi, Lynn and
Hi, Norm.
Carolyn.
Yeah.
Don't let me interrupt you. I just was popping into the breakout room with the fewest people.
Yeah, we were just saying who we were.
Okay, well, I'll let you get back to work. Thank you.
He's a longtime irrigator in the North Valley. Barbara.
Yes, I know Barbara.
For a
I
few
worked with
years.
Barbara for years.
Oh, great.
See you. Thank you.
Okay. What did you?
They didn't need you?
No, they were still introducing themselves,
Okay.
and they're all water people, so they'll come up with something.
So I think we probably only have time for a couple report outs. We'll try to do as many as possible, but
My concern
definitely-
is that people aren't going to have been able to do anything, and they won't be of much substance. Since I got our timing so badly out of whack.
I think you'd be surprised. 7 minutes can actually be really productive. And when I asked group 1 if they understood the instructions for what they were supposed to do, they said it was very clear. They understood.
Okay.
And they are water people, but looks like there's a water person at least one of every group. Maybe not room 7.
Now, how are you looking at the breakout groups again? I don't see that.
Go to more at the bottom right.
More, and I don't have more.
On your toolbar. Do you have
Oh,
break? Do
looking at it.
you have a break something? It's 4 squares that has breakouts. That's the other way it shows up.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay, I've got it. Is Charlotte Alethea's friend?
No.
They're coming back soon.
Yeah. I'll give him 1 more minute.
Okay.
On accident.
Please call me after this and tell me how Rob's doing.
Okay.
Looks like I that was a
Hey, Lynn, and Carol. Anyway, I felt like I've been through this is deja vu revisited for me, and I'm really strong since my youthful experience with the
We lost.
oil and water conservation with the community, both in the forest and on the farms. I just feel like there's something missing now. We're not communicating with the people that we need to be getting engaged. And I've been here
With those people.
Like I say,
Huh?
I attended my
This
first
is the meeting. What are you talking about?
in 1964. I've heard these stories over and over, and it kind of worries me.
Yep.
Oh, all right. So I think a lot of us came back unmuted. So just to help with Zoom echo, check yourself. You should be muted unless you're reporting out. Thanks for sharing that out, John. And I hope you all. Aha. I know that those are never enough time. But I'm hoping everyone assigned some report outs. We've only got like about 10 minutes for report out, so try to keep your report out from your group conversation to about a minute or two. I will go first and then pass it on to the next person. I had a small little crew. We were still sort of digesting all of the information that Rachel and Norm shared with us, so it was still sort of in the brainstorming process. But there was conversation, right, about how sharing information, especially in more rural communities, which are definitely ones that we need to prioritize in terms of outreach, means we need to think a little bit more creatively in terms of the in-person outreach, right? There was mention of, there's not many newspapers, so identifying the one that people do read, posting things in the post office, the fact that Zoom meetings are oftentimes really helpful for those folks because of travel. It's easier to access email lists and things like that. There was also discussion about the need because of the ISC having limited staff capacity. What role do external orgs and advocates have to play in terms of, to use their words, like ghost writing a lot of this stuff to make sure that the ISC has the capacity to show progress in this process so they can get more money. And another thing that was discussed was about nonprofits interested in this water planning issue really needing to step up and see what they can provide support in terms of public engagement. So anything from like what Rachel talked about in terms of providing childcare or stipends, transportation, how can we supplement the ISC's lack of funding for that now to sort of show that support so they can keep getting money to kind of, as Norm said earlier, snowball this. Saralda, I'm assuming you got your hand up because you've got a report out, so I'm going to pass it on to you to keep this moving. All right, you should be asked to.
Hi, in our small group, we had 4 of us. I believe 3 were from around the Albuquerque area, including Charlotte Craig, Ian Colburn, and myself, and then John Boucher, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, from Santa Fe. See, Charlotte was saying use the water groups, the existing water groups. I'm hope I'm getting it right. Charlotte suggested Albuquerque Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority to, because we were saying our request in our discussion was about getting public input from the different regions. Ian Colburn said he recommended the Water Utility Authority in Albuquerque as being a conduit. And he also said he thinks that people aren't just everyday people that have really good things to say. They need help to be able to put things into words. And so thus there needs to be some education element. And John Boucher from Santa Fe, he said, trying to get people engaged in the planning process, it wasn't anything implementable. A region can decide not to follow the priorities or not to follow for water use. He was seeing the problem with that kind of loophole that the House entered into the bill, and he said, but there should be leverage used because the larger cities will be the first to be cut off, and ways to give folks autonomy to be engaged. That's the notes I took. That's all.
Thank you so much. Who's next? Who wants to share next?
This is Rex.
Oh, Rex, go for it. And then Lori, I have you next.
Okay. The our group actually was scattered nicely around the state. One of the concerns is that irrigation districts will probably be well represented in this process, and we should make sure that we expand the opportunity for non-irrigation district folks to comment, particularly younger people. We should use social media to get out and make contacts. We also have time now to educate the public that we're a very small group. Most of the state has not a clue what this legislation is or what it means. And so education is going to just getting that information out there. And then one of the things that's going to be crucial is training people who go out to communicate what we're trying to do to the broader public. Those people are going to need some specific training to try and get the and also to make the contacts that we want, the broader contacts that we want. I think that's a kind of a quick summary of what we talked about.
Thank you so much, Rex. That was awesome. Lori.
Okay, hi. So our group was very small. It was just me and John Larson. We had a good conversation and basically kind of wrapped it up by me asking, so what do you think it's going to take to make this program work? And we came up with basically 4 things, which are probably the same 4 things that everybody's going to come up with because they're pretty obvious. But anyway, money, public engagement, and understanding. So both those things, both the understanding piece and the engagement piece, and which comes first, they're probably kind of like they're probably like parallel. And then the question of where are the young people and the midlife people, you know, folks with jobs and kids and stuff like that. This time of day is really hard for them, I'm guessing. So that's another piece of the challenge, I think, for us, is to figure out how to make it possible for people who have constraints on their daily schedules and big demands on their lives to participate in a meaningful way. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Lori. We've got, oh, perfect. Kathy, I'm going to pass it to you. We've got about 3 minutes left for report out and a couple more groups, so about a minute each.
Hi, I'm Kathy Freese. I was in a group with Kathleen Grudy and John R. Brown. John and I largely led the discussion or had the discussion. John pointed out 2 of the things that we need to do to communicate to the broader water community that with interest in water management. One is make clear the benefits of our participation in this process, not only for rulemaking, but also participating in the regional groups. And the second one is the consequences of not participating, which are profound. What I had to contribute was, how do we do this? Specifically, what actions can we take to communicate the benefits of participating and not participating? And what I have to personally offer is the organization of which I am a founder, the East Mountain Protection Action Coalition, which is committed to holding accountable people who are wanting to develop and making the decisions about or permitting the development of a very large development in the East Mountains that would consume up to 1 billion gallons of water annually. And communicating with the public, specifically through our website, which we're already doing, and newsletters, which we are initiating, the information to the public and engagement of the public through letting people know in particular about this legislative process and how to engage. Also wanting to participate in developing a coalition of grassroots water resources advocates to contribute to the rulemaking and guidelines, and then participation in the regions. So offering a single voice, if you will, for the water advocate community. And if you want more information, I can certainly post our
Awesome.
website.
Thanks, Kathy. Ruth, I'm going to pass it to you to wrap it up. I think we still have one lone group that hasn't reported out. You should drop it in the chat if you haven't, but Ruth, go for it.
Okay, so we talked about ways to engage public participation. I was concerned that people would think this was too technical an issue for them to tackle, just individual citizens. I think Kathy hit on a really good point that if it's something that's really important to you personally, you'll participate. So presenting this as something that's vital and urgent, that gets people hooked in, is important, and publicizing the consequences of the water crisis and making sure it isn't overly technical. So that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Any last, we have that last group that's missing, I think, from my list. If you want to chime in for 30 seconds, we've got the time.
Yes, this is Lynn, and we only had 3 people, and we pretty much came up with what was just said, that we really ought to be honest with the people. 20% or 25% less water, and it's not really realistic, because that's going to concur in different places at different times, and people are going to really have difficulty dealing with it. And so we need to publicize, the dire stuff. Hey, can happen, and we need to really start preparing it, and you need to get your community together and find out ways to use less water.
Awesome. Thanks for that great wrap up. And we are coming to the close of this session. I think there are a lot of questions left unanswered that I think means you all have to come back to our July 20th session, because then you can ask this of the Interstate Stream Commission, the people in charge. So any of those things about, like, what's the process, what's the funding, how do we do this, etc., save those questions and register for the July 20th session, because that's really, I think, the best place to get those answered. I know there were a lot of questions or conversation, right, about how do we include more people. We generated so many great ideas for that. And I think it does fall on the folks who are here. Bring a friend to that July 20th meeting. If you're asking where the young people are, I think you all know young people. Invite them, get them to show up to one of these. I think this is really, Norm said it best, and I'm not going to try to say much more beyond that. The passage of this law really was a tipping point, and it's up to us to snowball it. So you all have wonderful communities around you. Invite them to these sessions, which will really help people understand both what the issue is, how to advocate, and we'll really push this forward. So I will open it briefly to Rachel and Norm to see if they've got anything else left to close. Otherwise, I think, we've got a survey that Brittany just dropped in the chat. It helps us a ton if you do that, and it only takes a few minutes at most. So please do that and sign up for the July 20th session. But I'll pass it to Norm and Rachel just in case they've got any last things to leave you all with tonight.
I just want to say thank you for coming tonight, and thank you to Norm and others for inviting me to be part of this forum. And I look forward to continued engagement, and I hope we all will come together to work on these the rulemaking and guideline process that we hope to find out more about on the July 20th forum. So please come and attend that and join us at that time.
Awesome. Norm.
So I'll just close by saying that we have 10 workshops planned. This is the second of 10. They all relate to this new regional water planning program. They directly relate to it. We heard from participants in the first workshop that we needed to provide more basic information. And so the Middle Rio Grande Water Advocates are planning to hold some pop-up Zoom sessions to provide basic information, to just talk with people, answer questions, that sort of thing. So please Open your emails from us, put the Middle Rio Grande Water Advocates in your address book so that our emails don't go to a folder that you don't look at. And I guess the most important thing to say is that we all need to make water a part of our daily conversations. It's not getting enough attention. It's an urgent problem for us. But most of us don't know how to deal with it. And as a result, it's kind of not at the forefront of our minds. If we have to, for New Mexico to succeed and even to continue to exist into the future, we have to change our governance of our water, and planning is where it starts. Thank you so much for attending. The survey will pop up in your browser when you exit the Zoom meeting. So please take a few minutes to fill that out and give us feedback about what we can do better and things that we could do that we're not. Thank you for attending.
Thank you all. Have a lovely evening. See you in a month.
Thank you so much, everyone.